The day after they held this news conference, we had them on Democracy Now! And we showed the news conference. You can go to our website, democracynow.org, and see it. And we had on an old PR news guy, an old PR executive from Canada named Jim Hogan, the author of Climate Cover-Up, The Crusade to Deny Global Warming. He said on Democracy Now! In response to their action, the PR stunt wasn't pulled off by the yes-men. The PR stunt is basically being pulled off by the US Chamber of Commerce, and it's been going on for decades. Hogan's book describes what he calls a 2-decade-long campaign by the energy industry in Canada and the United States, basically designed to confuse the public about climate change and to give people the sense that there's a debate about the science of climate change. So where's the hope? The hope is in the remarkable actions people have taken all over the world. On October 24th, there were more than 4,000 actions around the world to deal with climate change, organized by a group called 350.org, named after the scientists, what the scientists have identified as a sustainable target for carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere, 350 parts per million. We're currently at 387 parts per million. Among the actions, well, the president of the Maldives, Mohammed Nasheed, held an underwater cabinet meeting, donning scuba gear, and literally meeting in 20 feet of water in the world's lowest lying country with his entire cabinet, except 2 of the members that didn't know how to scuba dive. Well, they signed an SOS from the front line declaration, reading in part, "If we can't save the Maldives today, you can't save the rest of the world tomorrow." He will carry the declaration to Copenhagen, and Democracy Now! Will be in Copenhagen, covering what could be the most important global diplomatic summit in history, dealing with, well, what could only be described as the fate of the Earth. We'll be in the streets where many people will be. We'll be talking to the many groups represented there and those that can't make it to Copenhagen, maybe don't want to increase their carbon footprint, but deal with this issue. And we'll be dealing with the leaders as they take on this issue. As to whether our leader, as to whether President Obama will be there, that's another question. It's interesting to note he will be in the region, right? He's winning the Nobel Peace Prize, and he will be in Oslo, not very far. And he was just in Copenhagen, so he knows where it is. He was there pushing for Chicago to get the Olympics. This meeting might be a little more important, dealing with the issue of global warming in the world. And if he signals now that he's going, it is not clear that he will go. It is so important that the most powerful person on earth thinks this is important, and it will be a signal to world leaders to come and elevate this conference. You know, I think for a long time now, people have felt that they were hitting their head against a brick wall. And now that wall has become a door. And the door is open a crack. And the question is whether it will be kicked open or slammed shut. And that's not open, that's not just dependent on that one person in the White House. It's dependent on all of you, because it's really grassroots movements that make a difference. Grassroots movements armed with information. You get the information and decide how you want to proceed from there. I think President Obama understands this more than anyone else. After all, he was the community organizer-in-chief, become the commander-in-chief. So he respects what community organizing is about, probably fears it as well, because he knows the power that he wielded. But now, well, others have to take on that mantle. The good thing is, parents all over this country are saying to their kids, maybe you can be a community organizer too. President Obama signaled how he deals with issues. A year and a half ago, when he was in the backyard of a Montclair, New Jersey house at a fundraiser, not clear he was going to be winning the presidential election. He was holding a fundraiser, and a guy raised his hand at the end of the evening and said, "What are you going to do about the Middle East?" And Senator Obama, presidential candidate Obama at the time, told the story of A. Philip Randolph. He was the world-class organizer in this country in the 1920s and 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. He organized the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, the African-American conductors on the trains in this country. He then organized the 1963 March on Washington, where Dr. Martin Luther King gave his I Have a Dream speech. Well, he befriended Eleanor Roosevelt, and she took him to see FDR. And he talked about the condition of black people in this country. He talked about the condition of working people in this country. And FDR said, I don't disagree with you, but you'll have to make me do it. That's the story that Senator Obama told in this backyard in New Jersey. And he repeated, make me do it. And I think that is the challenge today. As the great abolitionist Frederick Douglass said, power concedes nothing without a demand. And that's what people have to formulate now on whatever issue is most important to you to organize. Because those who are used to walking the west wing of the White House, used to having the ear of the most powerful person on earth and making their demands, if he's sitting there, can't point out the window of the Oval Office and say, if I do that, they will storm the Bastille. If there's no one out there, he's in big trouble. Sometimes it's to support his positions, and other times it's to take a completely contrary point of view because you feel it's wrong. But either way, the only way to make a democracy live, the only way to make a democracy function, is to be engaged as citizens, as non-citizens. And I'll end by just talking about the importance of the independent media in this and the role of this. I always talk about a free media and how important it is in this country and around the world. I didn't think I'd have to talk as much about freeing the media. But at the Republican convention, that's exactly what we had to talk about when more than 40 people, 40 reporters were arrested. Among them, my colleagues, Sharif Abdel-Quddus and Nicole Salazar, producers of Democracy Now! And me. We got arrested on the first day of the Republican convention. Why? Well, we were simply doing our jobs. It was a bright blue sky day. 10,000 people marched for peace from the St. Paul City Hall to the Excel Center where the convention was taking place, about to open. Active duty soldiers led the protest, those who were opposed to the war in Afghanistan and Iraq. And my colleagues went on to cover the protest. I went on to the convention floor to cover delegates from the hottest state, from Alaska. And I got a call on my cell phone that Sharif and Nicole were being arrested downtown St. Paul. We raced off the floor of the convention, went to 7th and Jackson. It was a big old parking lot. The riot police had the area fully contained. And I raced up to the riot police line. And I just said very quickly, they could see I'd come from the convention floor. I had all my credentials around my neck. I said, I'm a credentialed reporter. I want to speak to your commanding officer. Our reporters are inside. They're both credentialed. We need to have them released right away. Whereupon, it wasn't seconds before they ripped me through the line, twisted my arms behind my back, slapped those handcuffs on, and pushed me down onto the ground. I was desperately looking for Nicole and Sharif because I heard they'd been hurt. I could only see Sharif across the parking lot, his hands behind his back. He was handcuffed and he was bleeding. His arm was bleeding. I demanded to be brought to him. Finally, I was. And as we stood there, his credentials clear around his neck as mine were, I said, you must release us. You know that we are journalists. You know that we are covering this convention and we have the right to do that. The Secret Service came over and ripped the credentials from around our necks. I was charged with a misdemeanor, with interference with a peace officer, if only there was a peace officer there. And I was brought into the police wagon where Nicole was. She was handcuffed. She had her credentials around her neck. She quickly described what happened. She said they were covering the protests. The police moved in very quickly. And as they came at her in formation, she filmed all of this. She was shouting, press, press, holding up her press credentials. They were shouting, face on the ground, and they took her down as her camera tumbled. But she filmed it all, and you watched the film as the camera tumbled onto the ground. They pushed her on the ground, knee or boot in her back. They were pulling on her leg, and because they forced her face in the ground, they bloodied her face. Sharif was telling the police to calm down. And they took him and threw him up against the wall, kicked him twice in the chest, took him down, and twisted his arms behind his back and handcuffed him. They both faced felony riot charges. I was charged with misdemeanor. They were taken to jail. I was taken to the police garage where they'd erected cages for the protesters. But I'll tell you something. It was only because of a decentralized, independent media that we were ultimately released, because the YouTube video of our arrest just went viral. It was the most watched videotape on YouTube of the first 2 days of the convention. And within hours, they were released from jail. I was taken out of the police garage with the cages. Even the AP photographer was not released when they were, because of the power of independent media. We should not have to get a record to put things on the record. It is our job in covering these events that are supposed to be celebrations of the democratic process. They're the conventions. It's our job, yes, to go to the convention floor and get the orchestrated message from that, to go into the corporate suites, who's sponsoring the Republican Governors Association, or in Denver, who is sponsoring the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee, find